in the study of His Word. Amen. We have been studying the chronology of the crucifixion, the happenings day by day as Yeshua went up before His passion. So they came to Jerusalem. Then Yeshua went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold the doves. And He would not allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. Then He taught, saying to them, Is it not written, My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it a den of thieves. Mark 11:15 through 17. This was the last time that Messiah goes up onto the Temple Mount and cleanses the temple in preparation for the Passover. In the morning, as they went along, they saw a fig tree withered from the roots. Kepha remembered and said to Yeshua, Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered. In Mark 11:20 and 21. So at the time of prayer in the morning, he is going by that fig tree that he had cursed. And he notices, or Kepha notices, that it's withered. And he makes a special statement to Yeshua. Look, it's happened just like you said it would. And Yeshua says to him, have faith in Yahweh. Notice where he is directing the worship to the Heavenly Father. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go and throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. Says Mark 11:22 through 26. He is getting his disciples ready. He wants them to be holy. He wants them to stay in a level of holiness this whole time. That brings us to Aviv 13, Sunset Monday to Sunset Tuesday. It's the second day before the Passover. One day, as Yeshua was teaching the people in the temple courts and proclaiming the full message, the chief priests and the rabbis of the Torah, together with the elders, came up to him. Tell us by what authority you're doing these things. Tell us by what authority you have to come up here, cleanse the temple, kick off the illegal priests, leaving only the bona fide priests. Tell us by what authority you can do these things, they said. Who gave you this authority? Where did you get your shmicha? Who ordained you for this? He replied, I will also ask you a question. And that's generally what rabbis do, is answer a question with a question. Tell me, Yohanan's immersion, was it from heaven or of human origin? They discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he will ask, why didn't you believe in it? But if we say of human origin, all the people will stone us, because they are persuaded that Yohanan was a Naba'im, a prophet. So they answered, we don't know where it came from. Yeshua said, neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. Luke 20:1 through 8. See, the Pharisees had not stood with the Bnei Yeshai, or the Essenes. And so they couldn't very well side with Yohanan then, but they didn't want to side against him because he was very popular, especially after he'd been martyred. And so they just abstained from making an opinion, which left Yeshua wide open, because then they had to abstain from harassing him. Each day Yeshua was teaching at the temple. So each day after he had cleansed the temple, he was there preaching and teaching continually. And in each evening he went out to spend the night on the hill called the Mount of Olives. And all the people came early in the morning to hear him at the temple. Luke 21, 37 through 38. Now this is important because the story that we've always been told is how the people rejected him, how they didn't want him, how they would not listen to him. But during this week, we see that's just not true. The people were waiting in bated breath for him to manifest himself as the rightful heir to the throne. And so they were coming up constantly to hear him speak in the temple courts. Yeshua left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Do you see these things? He asked. The rabbis say no one has seen a beautiful building if they didn't see Herod's temple. It was magnificent. It was gorgeous. It was even more beautiful than Solomon's temple. And so the disciples are saying, look, Rabbi, look at these buildings. Aren't they gorgeous? And he says, truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. As Yeshua was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Listen what they say. Tell us, they said, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Matthew 24, 1 through 3. The Olivet prophecy, known as the Little Apocalypse, includes Yeshua's description of the end times. His warning to his followers that they will suffer tribulation and persecution before the ultimate triumph of the kingdom of Yahweh. When you look at Matthew 24 and Luke 21, the one thing that you notice is there's no mention of a rapture. He gives a detailed description of what will happen. And he tells his disciples, reaching across the time to us, what will happen. That we will have to suffer tribulation and persecution before the ultimate triumph of the kingdom of Yahweh. Now here's what he says will happen. Counterfeit preachers, wars and rumors of wars, ethnic groups will war against ethnic groups, earthquakes, famines, pestilence, catastrophes, false prophets, apostasy, persecution of the Nazarene movement, the spread of the full messianic message, the abomination of desolations, the great tribulation, the signs in the heavens, and the second coming in the clouds. Matthew 24 indicates that the generation witnessing the rebirth of the fig tree of Israel is the same generation that will observe the fulfillment of the signs referred to in the Olivet prophecies. And that would be consummated by the second coming of King Messiah. Now, Ray Stedman, in his book, What on Earth is Happening, said this, and I quote, there are many predicted passages in both the Old and New Testaments, but none is clearer or more detailed than the message Yeshua delivered from the Mount of Olives. This message was given during the turbulent events of the Lord's last week. End of quote. Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the rabbis of the Torah were scheming to arrest Yeshua secretly and kill him, but not during the festival. They said, or the people may riot. Pay attention to that. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Shimon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar full of expensive perfume made of pure spikenard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," Yeshua said. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you have always with you. You can help them at any time you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the message is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Mark 14, 3-9. This is amazing, because we learned that on the 10th of Aviv, when they brought the Passover lamb into the house, they bathed that lamb and then anointed the lamb so that it wouldn't smell. And so we're seeing that Yeshua, the Lamb of Yahweh that takes away the sin of the world, is being anointed for his burial, for his sacrifice. Then Yehuda, the Karaite, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Yeshua to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over, says Mark 14, 10-11. Yehuda the Karaite went to betray Messiah over the activities of this day. Yehuda had issues with the Messiah, predominantly coming from his Karaite faith. Karaism believes it is the original faith of the Hebrew Scriptures. Karaites do not take the Holy Scriptures literally, since according to their belief, every written work requires interpretation. We view the Scriptures as Torah, as teachings and instructions from the Most High. They view the Scriptures as Kara, to be interpreted. So they believe that the Scriptures need to be interpreted by the reader. Karaites maintain that human beings have an obligation to study the Hebrew Scriptures and determine for themselves the correct meaning of the Almighty's commandments based on their own reasoning and understanding. It is against Karaism that Rabbi Kiva, that the world knows as Peter, makes this statement: knowing this first, that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. 2 Peter 1:20. Presumably, Rabbi Kiva would have gotten this doctrine from Messiah Yeshua, a reality backed up in that it is part of the Messianic Scriptures. This stands in opposition to the ancient adage of the Karaite sages that declares, and I quote, "Search well in the Scriptures and do not rely on anyone's opinion." End of quote. In this regard, the Karaite sages taught, and I quote again, "He who relies upon any of the rabbis of the exile without personal investigation, it is as if he has engaged in idolatry." End of quote. So when Yeshua was speaking, Yehuda didn't take his words as Scripture. He took it as opinion. What he wanted from Yeshua was for him to establish the kingdom and for him to be part of that cabinet. King Messiah Yeshua said, "The student is not above the teacher. It is enough for students to be like their teacher," says Matthew 10:24-25. How then can they call upon the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the full message. Quoting Isaiah 52 and 7, in Romans 10, 14 and 15. Karaites reject the Reformation put in motion by Ezra. They reject the rabbis. Yehuda sarcastically refers to Yeshua as rabbi, a Pharisaic title in Mark 14:45. Messiah Yeshua uses many sayings that are Pharisaic in origin. We see that in Matthew 7, 12 and 15, Mark 2 and 27, John 7 and 22. And he even quotes the Babylonian Talmud in Yoma 85b. Karaites believe only in the authority of the Hebrew scriptures and reject all rabbinic doctrine. So you can see, Yehuda did not recognize rabbinic spiritual authority. He saw Messiah Yeshua only in Davidic terms. He only saw Yeshua as the crown prince of Israel. It probably was confusing to Yehuda that Yeshua was going around constantly acting like a rabbi when he wanted him to act like a prince. Yeshua said to the crowds and to his disciples, the rabbis of the Torah and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Matthew 23, 1 through 3. King Messiah Yeshua's reign as King of the Jews in Jerusalem lasted for less than 1 week. What happened during that week? According to the Messianic account, Yeshua cleansed the temple. After that, he confined himself to teaching in the temple concerning the full Messianic message of the kingdom, accentuating the apocalyptic until the time of his arrest. The cleansing of the temple was not an isolated event, but a full occupation of 1/3 of the city of David, encompassing the Temple Mount, the Kidron Valley, the Mount of Olives, by Messiah Yeshua and his followers, and including the suburbs of Bethany and Bethage. For a few days, the rightful heir to the Davidic dynasty, made to look like a deluded fanatic with little support, was able to hold on to a limited area of Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount, interrupting the jurisdiction of the high priest temporarily. This is the area that he occupied. The cleansing of the temple was not an isolated event, but an occupation of 1/3 of the city. We just said this. Do you believe it? Speedily cause the branch of David, that's the crown prince, thy servant to sprout, and let his horn, his strength, be exalted by thy, Yahweh's salvation, because daily do we wait for Yahweh's salvation. The temple ritual was not interrupted, for Yeshua allowed the vast majority of the priests to remain at their post, ejecting only those not of Levitical descent or closely associated with the false Edomite high priest. Had Yeshua not allowed the sacrifices and oblation to occur, he would have been seen to be the Mashiach Nagid, the Antichrist, not the Messiah. For it is prophesied by Daniel, he shall confirm the covenant with many for a week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, to stop. So he couldn't do that. And for the overspreading of the abomination, he shall make it desolate, even until the consumption. And that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. Daniel 9 and 27. Now Caiaphas, or Yosef bar Caiaphas, an Edomite, a Sadducee priest and a Roman appointee, actively sought to prevent open rebellion against Rome, lest it escalate and endanger what little autonomy the temple priests were given by Caesar Augustus. Caiaphas probably calculated that it would be better to wait until the first wave of enthusiasm was over and then catch Yeshua off guard, preferably by night, while the Sanhedrin slept, due to the high percentage of Davidic and Pharisee members who would have been either supporters or sympathetic to Yeshua. Now, in the Messianic text by Raphael Patai, I quote, "The high priest in particular was termed the anointed of Yahweh with the establishment of the monarchy. The same term was applied to the king. He was the anointed of Yahweh because he was installed in the high office by receiving the sacrament of anointment." So, here is the Messiah against the anointed priest, a Mashiach, and against the anointed king, Herod, a Mashiach. But he was the Mashiach, the Messiah, the anointed one. So you can see with those issues on the table, this was a volatile mixture. Yeshua's performance of the tabernacle rites of the king was a political act of great significance, consolidating his claim to the rank of Messiah. This was a spiritual battle to expose the true anointed. He picks up the scroll of the Haftorah and he reads, "The Spirit of the sovereign Yahweh is upon me, because Yahweh has anointed me. He has sent me to bring the full message to the oppressed." He read Isaiah 61:1 and he said, "This has been fulfilled in your ears. It's me. I'm the anointed one." Again, from the Messianic text by Raphael Patai, I quote, "In early monarchic days, the person of the anointed of Yahweh came to be considered sacrosanct. To harm him or even to curse him was a capital offense." End of quote. What does the scripture say? Touch not my anointed, do my prophets no harm. 1 Chronicles 16:22 and Psalms 105 and 15. Touch not mine anointed and do my prophets no harm. Again, from Messianic text by Raphael Patai, I quote, "A further development of this concept can be seen in the belief that Yahweh provided special protection to his anointed king. The Psalms contain several references to the idea of divine intervention for the anointed of Yahweh, the idealized Davidic king." End of quote. "Now I know that Yahweh saves his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heaven with the mighty acts of his saving right hand." Psalms 20:7. However, Messiah Yeshua's preaching was darkly apocalyptic during the occupation. As the Messianic account indeed shows, prophesying his own death, the doom that would come upon the Jews, and the destruction of the temple by the Romans that would ultimately come in 70 CE. Messiah did not spend all of his time on the Temple Mount during the occupation. In the evening, he retired to his base in the Mount of Olives. The prophecy of Zechariah, on which Yeshua particularly relied, states that the location of the miracle of Yahweh's intervention would be the Mount of Olives. The mountain was of great significance, especially for Messiah, for not only was it the location of the expected miracle, it was also where King David sought refuge and prayed. Moreover, it was here where the prophet Ezekiel saw the appearance of the glory of Yahweh, from which Yeshua was waiting. That brings us to what is called the Last Supper. In the Messianic account, the story of the Last Supper is where Messiah Yeshua foresaw his own intended death on the hangman's tree, Yehuda the Karaite's betrayal, and Rabbi Shimon Kifa's denial. But it is also where he instituted the Messianic interpretation of the Passover Seder. The feature of the Kiddush, the sanctification cup, with bread and wine, is consistent in all the feasts of Yahweh and applies to Sukkot as much as it does Pesach or Passover. Here, Messiah Yeshua uses the bread and wine in the ceremony of the Kiddush to make the Passover on many Feast of Tabernacles. The wine is used first to put a blessing on the feast. The bread is then used as a ceremonial beginning of that feast. Messiah Yeshua is appalled at the pagan interpretation later applied to the simple Kiddush with which he began the Last Supper. Do this in remembrance of me. Passover is always called the Feast of Remembrance. It's where we remember the Exodus. And Yeshua is now saying to us, do this in remembrance of me. In Matthew 26:29, in the middle of the Passover, he says, I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Where is he going to drink it? Well, the next time we see him drinking the wine is at the marriage feast of the Lamb. So that tells me that the marriage feast of the Lamb is going to be Passover. Hallelujah. Blessed are those who are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb, says Revelations 19:9. Who wants to be there? I want to see Yeshua drink that cup, don't you? The blood is the sign of our new relationship. Yeshua did not ratify the adulterous cup. He drank that for us, for you, and for me. But he did ratify the new covenant, the renewed vows of betrothal to Yahweh. The blood is the sign of a new relationship. In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink in remembrance of me. It says 1 Corinthians 11:25. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of Yahweh's grace. Ephesians 1:7. But now in Messiah Yeshua, you who once were far away have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. This is Ephesians 2:13. And through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the gallows. Colossians 1:20. So see, the blood ratifies the renewed vows. What's it say in Deuteronomy 30? Wherever I've scattered you, when you remember this covenant, I'll bring you back and I'll restore your inheritance. Sounds like the prodigal son, doesn't it? When we come to ourselves and we remember the covenant, wherever he scattered us across this globe, and we remember that covenant, he will love us again. He'll show that love. He's always loved us, but he'll show that love by gathering us back to him and restoring our inheritance. The blood is the sign of that new relationship. The blood satisfies the righteous demands of Yahweh. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when you see the blood, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt, says Exodus 17:13. So Yahweh is saying, when I see the blood, I'll pass over you. What an amazing statement. Little children, I would that you would not sin. But if you do, you have an advocate, which is Yeshua the righteous. In the courts of heaven, the accuser of the brethren, the Hasatan, the prosecutor, brings charges on us. He's filthy. He's an idolater. He's an adulterer. Yeshua says, but he's mine. Father, I've applied the blood to him. He's called out in your name. And I've heard him and I've applied the blood. And Yahweh says, well, when I see the blood, judgment is passed over him. Isn't that good? The blood is the cure. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds have been forgiven and whose sins have been covered. Blessed is the man whose sins the Lord will not take into account. Romans 4, 7 through 8. The blood restores at one moment with Yahweh. Who will bring any charge against those whom Yahweh has chosen? It is Yahweh who justifies. Who then is the one who condemns? No one. Messiah Yeshua, who died, more than that, who is raised to life, is at the right hand of Yahweh and is also, here it is, interceding for us. We have a friend of the court standing before Yahweh. It says Romans 8, 33 through 34. Oh, there's power in the blood.
Amen.
After preparing himself through several nights of prayer in the cleft of the Mount of Olives, Messiah Yeshua was preaching that the day of Yahweh was at hand. So he called together his disciples for a final strengthening of the bond between them, an echad, before their crucial time of testing. The atmosphere was charged and must have been tense. They were about to embark on a great venture on which the spiritual balance of them, their country, and the whole world would depend. What a pressure on those young men's shoulders. That brings us to a V14, Sunset Tuesday to Sunset Wednesday before the Passover. Robert W. Funk said, and I quote, one of the stories about King David that served as a model for the stories about Yeshua was the account of David's flight across the Kidron Valley and up the Mount of Olives during the rebellion of Absalom, his son, in 2 Samuel 15 through 17. David had been betrayed, not just by his son who launched his revolt by exchanging a kiss with David in 2 Samuel 14:33, but by Ahithophel, who had been one of David's counselors, but had now become a co-conspirator with Absalom in 2 Samuel 15, 12, and 31. Ahithophel was to David what Judas was to Yeshua. When it became apparent that Absalom was about to attack Jerusalem, David fled across the Wadi Kidron with his company and ascended the Mount of Olives in 2 Samuel 15, 13 through 18, and 23 and 30. Yeshua did the same on the night in which he, like David, was betrayed. End of quote. All the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people crossed over. The king himself also crossed over the Wadi Kidron, and all the people crossed over towards the way of the wilderness. There was Zadok also, and all the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of Yahweh. And they set down the ark of Yahweh, and Abiathar went up until all the people had finished crossing over from the city. If I have found favor in your eyes, David said, he will bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling place. But if he says thus, I have no delight in you, here I am. Let him do with me as it seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer? Return to the city in peace, and your two sons with you, Ahimaaz, your son, and Jonathan, the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait in the plains of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. Therefore Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of Yahweh back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So David went up to the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and wept as he went up. And he had his head covered and went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went up to the head of the mountain, where he worshipped Yahweh. At the head, at the Rosh, at the place of the skull. He goes and worships Yahweh It says 2 Samuel 15, 23 through 30 and 32. Now, listen to what David says at the place of the skull on the Mount of Olives as he looks towards Yahweh. My Elohim, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? Oh, my Elohim, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear, and in the night season I'm not silent. I'm a worm and no man, a reproach of men, despised by the people. All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out their lip. They shake their head, saying, oh, he trusted Yahweh. Let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. They pierce my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them. For my clothing they cast lots. Says Psalms 22. Sound familiar? But wait a minute. That never happened to David. What's he talking about? Why is he praying that prayer? While David is walking up the summit, he has an epiphany. David was given a vision of the passion of the Messiah and then directed by Yahweh to plant Aaron's rod, knowing it would become the hangman's tree, the instrument of redemption for all mankind. He begins to transcend time and feel the agony that will take place 1,000 years later. Then he understands as he thrusts the rod into the ground on the Mount of Olives, just a stone's throw away from the third altar where the red heifer is offered up. And he says, oh, Yahweh is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pasture. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Oh, the Passover symbolism there. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Yahweh forever. Psalms 23. After crossing the Kidron Bridge, David followed this pathway, which ascended the Mount of Olives to Harosh, where Yahweh was worshipped, says 2 Samuel 15:32. The Hebrew word Harosh, translated in most scripture as the summit. However, these words should be translated as the head or the skull, for good reason. Ever since that day, that part of the Mount of Olives was known as Golgotha, or Gilgal. Once, as Yeshua had entered the cleft of the rock on the Mount of Olives, he looked down the Kidron Valley, that valley of decision, Joel 3:13 and 15 says, and Messiah Yeshua applied himself to intercessory prayer. He was resigned to the crucifixion and was spending the night at his base in the cleft of the Mount of Olives called Gethsemane, waiting for Yehuda to arrive with the temple police to arrest him. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with transgressors, and he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors, says Isaiah 53:12. My distress was bitter, and anxiety cried, how faithless men are. I will take in my hands the cup of salvation, and invoke Yahweh by name. I will pay my vows to Yahweh in the presence of all his people. A precious thing in Yahweh's sight is the death of those who die faithful to him. It says Psalms 116, 10 through 15. However, he was not waiting passively at Gethsemane for his arrest. He was expecting an awesome miracle and the appearance of the glory of Yahweh. But this manifestation would depend on his own worthiness in drinking of the cup and that of the disciples. Yeshua came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And he took with him Kepha and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping and said to Kepha, "What? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, the second time he went away and he prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done." And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them, went away again, and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to his Talmudim, his disciples, and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Matthew 26, 36 through 46. Remember, he is on the mountain. They have to come up to arrest him, so he could see them coming after him. Yeshua had not merely prophesied the coming of the kingdom of Yahweh. He had prepared for it. He had campaigned among the lost sheep of Israel, calling them to teshuvah, repentance, because he felt the coming kingdom was being held back by Israel's sins. The writings of the Pharisees often stress that Yahweh's promises to Israel are not automatically fulfilled. They depend on Israel's worthiness and cooperation. Consequently, even though Yeshua knew that the time for the coming of the day of Yahweh was at hand, what was needed now was a last great effort of prayer. The belief in the power of prayer was very strong among the Pharisees, especially the prayer of a righteous prophet. He told his disciples, "Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak," in Matthew 26:41. Messiah Yeshua was experiencing agony of sorrow about his approaching crucifixion. Being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground, says Luke 22:43 and 44. Watch and pray was his injunction to his disciples. Why did he warn them against entering into temptation? When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures, says James 4:3. So it's not enough just to pray. You have to find the mind of Yahweh and pray according to his will. Amen. What did Yeshua say? Thy will be done. Whatever, but thy will be done. And that's what James is saying. You can't pray against the will of the Father. That's wrong. When you pray what you want instead of what the Father wants, you're praying out of lust. That's a heavy understanding in it. The fervent prayer of a righteous person avails much. In other words, is very effective, says James 5:16. Ladies and gentlemen, it takes a while to pray through. Most people should get through praying. Get through begging. Get through telling what I want, what I want, what I want, and never break into what Yahweh wants in their life. Did you see how long it took Yeshua, his own son, to break into the mind of Yahweh? Not because he didn't understand it, but because of the pressures coming upon him. what might not be accomplished by the powerful prayers of a dedicated Messiah prophet supported by a band of holy men, all concentrating their thoughts towards Yahweh at a time and a place appropriate for salvation. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed. But here's what he says. Watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. Mark 13, 32 and 33. Only the most fervent beam of concentrated prayer directed from Gethsemane towards Yahweh could obliterate the traces of the sins of Israel and bring about the hour of redemption. Messiah Yeshua alone was not sufficient to fulfill Zechariah's prophecy, for he said, "Then you shall flee through my mountain valley, for the mountain valley shall reach to Azal. Yes, you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Thus Yahweh my Elohim will come, if all with thee, if everyone with you be holy." Zechariah 14 and 5. This explains why Messiah Yeshua narrowed his followers from 70 to 12 to 3. He brought the ones that he could best rely on. The power of sinless prayer would be far more important than the brute force of mere numbers. They prayed so hard he found them sleeping from sorrow. They weren't tired. They were exhausted out of sorrow. They weren't lazy. These men were fervent. They just couldn't bear up under the pressure. They had literally cried themselves to sleep out of sheer exhaustion. Yeshua then stands in the cleft of the rock in the Garden of Gethsemane with the craggy Mount of Olives looming over him like Mount Sinai above the children of Israel at the acceptance of the Torah. All that Yahweh has said, we will do it here, says Exodus 24:7. This is the valley of decision, the valley of the Lord's judgment. And he says, Father, not my will, but yours be done. Luke 22 and 42. He has chosen the moment well. The hearts of his prayer partners are set. His campaign and reclamation among the lost sheep of the house of Israel has been launched. The last battle fought. As he prays, he feels a sense of struggle. He wrestles in prayer till his sweat falls like great drops of blood to the ground. This is King Messiah Yeshua's Peniel. For he has struggled with Yahweh and with men, and he has prevailed. Quoting Genesis 32, 28 and 30. The difficulty of his prayer would be overwhelming for anyone else, and he can see that the powers of his chosen companions are waning. With great sadness, he realizes that the long travail of Israel has not yet come to an end. Oh, Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you weren't willing. Matthew 23 and 37. High priest Caiaphas, the Edomite Sadducean priest, and his father-in-law Annas, or Hanan first, coming out of retirement to help in the conflict, both aristocrat power brokers, despised by the Pharisees, the Essenes, and the Zealots, send out the temple police to arrest Yeshua on grounds of blasphemy. Returning a third time, Yeshua said to them, Are you sleeping and resting? Enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. Just as he was speaking, Yehuda, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the Torah, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with him. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Yeshua, Yehuda said, Rabbi, Rabbi! And he kissed him. the men seized Yeshua and arrested him. It says Mark 14, 41 through 46. Graham N. Stanton, in his book, The Gospels in Jesus, I quote, "Full of serene confidence, Yeshua takes the initiative and moves forward to meet his captors. When they state they are seeking Yeshua of Nazareth, he replies, 'I am he.' At this reference to his divine status, his captors drew back and fell to the ground. At the conclusion of the scene, Yeshua says confidently to Kepha, 'Shall I not drink the cup which the Father has given me?' Thereafter, throughout the Passion narrative, Yeshua remains in control of the events. There is no distress or sadness. In the Synoptic Gospels, Yeshua is on trial. In John, it is his captors who are on trial. In John, Yeshua is not so much the man of sorrows as the King of glory." End of quote. "Am I leading a rebellion," said Yeshua, "that you have to come out with swords and clubs to capture me?" Mark 14:48. Is that what I'm doing? Leading a rebellion, an overthrow, a coup d'etat? That you have to come armed to get me? Then the detachment of troops and the captains and the officers of the Jews arrested Yeshua and bound him, and they led him away to Ananias first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. John 18:12 through 13. High priest that year? What is this, an annual election? No, the high priest serves for life, but not in this arrangement with the Romans. Anyway, Elohim is Yahweh, and he has given us light by the sacrifice with cords to the horns of the altar. Psalms 118 and 27. So they're taking Yeshua in bounds. Every sacrifice, in a sense, is a type of Messiah Yeshua. He was bound even as Isaac was bound to be sacrificed in Genesis 22 and 9. He was about to be offered as a sacrifice for Israel and all mankind. Between 1 a.m. and daybreak, Yeshua was tried before Caiaphas and the legal council, acting as a Sanhedrin, made up mostly of Sadducees and Yeshua's enemies among the scribes and Pharisees, and found guilty of blasphemy. In the Babylonian Talmud, talking about Caiaphas' household, listen to what it says. "Woe is me for the house of Beotus. Woe is me for their club. Woe is me for the house of Hanan." That's Ananias. "Woe is me for their whisperings. Woe is me for the house of Caiaphas. Woe is me for their pen. Woe is me for the house of Ishmael. Woe is me for their fist. For they are the high priest, their sons are the treasurers, the money changers, their sons-in-laws are the temple officers, and their servants beat the people with staffs." Babylonian Talmud, Pesakim, the portion of the Passover in the Talmud, 57a. So even the Pharisees knew what Ananias and Caiaphas were like. They wrote about them in the Talmud. Deuteronomy 16:18-20. "Appoint judges and officials for each of your tribes in every town Yahweh your Elohim has given you, and they shall judge the people fairly. Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe, Judas, blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the innocent. Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land Yahweh your Elohim is giving you." Deuteronomy 16:18-20. The chief priests took counsel together as what they should do. The reputation of the Sanhedrin was to serve, not to destroy life. The Sanhedrin, or the Supreme Court, consisted of 70 plus 1 great Torah sages who met in the Lishkat HaGazit, or the chamber of hewn stone, adjacent to the temple in Jerusalem. During the time of Yeshua, Nicodemus, or Nicodemus ben Kurim, was the chief justice of the Sanhedrin. It is said that a Sanhedrin that imposes the death death penalty once in 7 years was considered a bloody Sanhedrin. But that ideal was jettisoned in the case of Yeshua before this illegal council, which met at night before an illegitimate priesthood, while members of the real Sanhedrin slept. Yeshua basically received 3 trials: the Jewish religious trial and 2 secular trials, one Herodian and the other Roman. The Jews were an occupied people. Only Roman courts had the right to execute anyone. The Jewish courts couldn't. The Jewish leaders could condemn Yeshua to death, but they couldn't execute him. Whatever verdict they rendered in their religious trial had to be one recognized by the Romans. And that is why there were so many trials. The Jews had to present the evidence from their trial to the Romans before they would execute Yeshua. But that's not what they do. They find Yeshua guilty of blasphemy and they render a capital punishment. But when they take the evidence to Pilate, they don't show him that. They say that Yeshua was an insurgent trying to overthrow Rome. The Romans needed to examine the evidence against Yeshua to determine if he indeed had committed a crime. But it had to be the same crime that they found him guilty of in the religious court. But they switched evidence, obstructing justice. So they went from this area of the priest over to Antonio's fortress. A multitude can't get in there. That's why the word says a mob met in there and said, "Crucify, crucify." The people were still asleep. This all happened in the wee hours of the morning. Pilate questions Yeshua, personally asking him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Yeshua replies, he doesn't try to hide it, "I am." He was the lawful king of the Jews. For some reason, the priest kept on heaping accusations against Yeshua despite the fact that his sedition was clearly established by Yeshua himself. He stirs up the people teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. Do not deliver me to the will of my adversaries, for false witness has risen up against me, and such as breathe out violence. Says Psalms 27:12. Ruthless witnesses come forward. They question me on things I know nothing about. Says Psalms 35:11. For many bore false witnesses against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Then some rose up and bore false witnesses against him. Mark 14:56 and 57. So, we'll leave it there. Do you see what's going on? Yeshua has been arrested. The family of the high priest have encircled him and they brought him up on charges. They've switched the charges back and forth. They've lied on him. And now he stands before Pilate. Pilate has the power to let him go or to kill him. The only way that you can kill him is if you believe that he is a threat to the Roman Empire. So we'll see the events that occur as they fold. We're going to break for lunch, and then we'll come back and finish the story because we've got to get to the resurrection. All right? Let's eat. Let's pray first. Can't have you eat like either. You have to pray. The humble will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek Yahweh will praise him. May your hearts live forever. Baruch atah Yahweh, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei minei mazano. Baruch atah Yahweh, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri ha'adama. Baruch atah Yahweh, Eloheinu melech haolam, sher hakol ni'evid baro. Which means, blessed are you, Yahweh, our Elohim, King of the universe, who created various kinds of sustenance or food, creator of the fruit of the earth, by whose word all things came to be. When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless Yahweh your Elohim for the goodly land that he's given you. Amen. Let's eat. What you think about that? What you think about that? Isn't that amazing?
I got it in the heart.
Yeah, I'll tie that all together. Now, what happens in
She can do the plate from here on that way, man. There's about 20 minutes after that.
man.
But you can just take this back, like our sunglasses.
Yeah, I mean,
This is where I get this stuff from.
You can get
yeah, I didn't
DVD.
hear.
I do that.
I know.
How you doing, man?
Did you hear before after you came here? I said you were already on record. All right, I'm just curious. Could it jump by itself if that's the case?
If
Well,
we
we're gonna find out.
Yeah. Shabbat shalom.
He'll put it on, you're gonna put this on the archives real quick, right?
You mean on YouTube?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So you can just find it on there.
Okay. Will.
And,
I can make you.
How you feeling?
Yes.
I'll put it on YouTube.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, when you name what kind of keywords should I use? I know the Rob Miller Agudat Brisk or Rob Miller
Do you have
Temple.
Facebook at all?
I do.
Just look for today's date
Yeah.
on the sermon.
On Facebook, go to Agudat Brisk and I'll add you.
Oh.
Looking
Just
for
type in
Facebook.
Agudat Brisk. and
Okay.
I'll,
Yeah, it will come
I'll
up.
add
Okay.
you.
All right. That'll work.
I'll
Thank
put it
y'all.
on
Yeah.
YouTube, and I'll send through that
Yeah,
route too. I'll send
do
some
you
other
know
sermons
his
over here on
name?
YouTube.
You could link here. You could connect here as a follower.
He's gonna go on Agudat Brisk
Yeah.
Facebook. You can type in
Now,
Agudat
I've
Brisk.
already friended Rob on
Right.
Facebook, so
But I manage the Agudat Brisk part of it. So
Okay.
just type in Agudat Brisk and I'll put you on.